The bell above the jewelry store door chimed, a fragile sound swallowed by the hum of the city outside. An old man shuffled in, his boots scuffing the polished marble floor, leaving faint trails of dust. His hands, gnarled like ancient oak, clutched a rusted ring that seemed to weigh heavier than his frail frame could bear. Elias Hawthorne, the store's appraiser, looked up from his loop, his breath catching as if the air had turned to ice. The ring wasn't just old, it was impossible. Its intricate engravings, barely visible beneath decades of corrosion, whispered of a craftsmanship lost to time, a relic that shouldn't exist in the modern world. "Who are you?" Elias stammered, his voice barely above a whisper, as the old man's cloudy eyes met his. There was no answer, only a faint smile, weathered and knowing, as if the man carried a secret older than the city itself. Elias's fingers trembled as he reached for the ring, his heart pounding with a mix of dread and fascination. This wasn't just jewelry, it was a story, a mystery, a fragment of something far greater than the small, dimly lit shop could contain. The old man's name was Amos. He was nobody, or so he claimed, just a wanderer who'd spent his life chasing shadows of the past. His coat, threadbare and patched, hung loosely over a frame that seemed to defy the weight of his years. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and gravelly, like stones shifting in a forgotten riverbed. "This ring," he said, placing it gently on the counter, "belonged to someone who changed the world, and I need to know if it's real." Elias, a man who prided himself on knowing every gem, every cut, every hallmark, felt a chill crawl up his spine. The ring's design was unlike anything in his books. No modern jeweler could replicate its delicate filigree, the way the metal seemed to pulse with a life of its own. He adjusted his glasses, peering closer, and noticed a faint inscription in a language he couldn't place. It wasn't Latin, nor Greek, nor any script he'd studied in his decades of work. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice tight. Amos's eyes drifted to the window, where the city's neon lights bled into the dusk. "A long time ago," he said, "in a place that doesn't exist anymore." His words carried a weight that made Elias's chest ache, as if the old man was speaking not just of a location, but of a time, a life, a love that had slipped through his fingers. The store felt smaller now, the walls closing in as Elias turned the ring over in his hands. He could feel the history in it, the kind of history that didn't belong in textbooks but in whispered legends. He thought of his own life, safe, predictable, spent cataloging trinkets for wealthy clients. This ring, this man, they were a disruption, a crack in the orderly world he'd built. Amos leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "There's a story behind it. A woman, a promise, a war." He paused, his gaze distant, as if seeing ghosts in the shadows of the shop. "I need to know if it's hers, if she's still out there." Elias's hands froze. The ring wasn't just a relic, it was a tether to someone, something, that Amos had carried for decades. The appraiser's mind raced. He'd seen love tokens before, lockets, bracelets, engraved bands, but this was different. This was desperation, hope, and grief forged into metal. He set the ring under the microscope, his heart thudding as he adjusted the lens. The engravings came into focus, revealing symbols that seemed to shift under the light, as if alive. Elias blinked, convinced his eyes were playing tricks. But the symbols didn't change, they grew clearer, sharper, almost calling to him. He pushed back from the counter, his chair scraping loudly in the silence. "Amos," he said, his voice unsteady, "this isn't just a ring. It's something else." He didn't know how to explain it, didn't want to. Part of him wanted to hand it back and tell the old man to leave, to take his mystery and his ghosts elsewhere. But another part, the part that had once dreamed of adventure, of uncovering truths buried by time, couldn't let go. Amos's smile faded, replaced by a look of quiet resolve. "I know," he said. "That's why I'm here. I've carried it for 60 years. It's time I know the truth." Elias swallowed hard, his fingers brushing the ring's surface. 60 years. A lifetime. What kind of man carries a rusted ring for 6 decades, chasing a truth that might break him? And what kind of ring could hold such power over a soul? The bell chimed again, and a young woman stepped into the store, her presence like a gust of wind scattering the tension. She was in her 20s, with sharp eyes and a leather jacket that seemed out of place among the glittering displays. "Mr. Hawthorne," she said, her voice clipped. I need your expertise on something urgent. Elias glanced at Amos, then back at her. This isn't a good time, Clara. Clara's gaze flicked to the old man, then to the ring on the counter. Her expression shifted surprise, recognition, something darker. Where did you get that? She asked, her voice low, almost accusatory. Amos's eyes narrowed, but he didn't speak. Elias felt the air grow heavy, as if the store itself was holding its breath. Clara knew something, and whatever it was about to change everything. Clara's question hung in the air like a storm cloud, charged and ready to break. Elias's fingers tightened around the ring, its cold metal grounding him as he glanced between the young woman and Amos, whose weathered face had hardened into something unreadable. Clara, Elias said, his voice sharper than intended, what do you know about this? She stepped closer, her boots clicking against the marble floor, her eyes locked on the ring. I've seen it before, she said, her voice low, almost a growl. Not that exact one, but one like it. My grandmother had a sketch of it in her journal. She called it the key to the lost. Amos's breath hitched, a sound so faint Elias almost missed it. The old man's hands trembled, but he didn't speak, his gaze fixed on Clara as if she were a ghost stepping out of his past. Elias's mind raced. Clara, his occasional assistant, had always been sharp, curious, but this was different. This was personal. Your grandmother? Elias asked, trying to piece together the puzzle. Clara had never mentioned her family before, only her knack for spotting fakes and her restless energy that made her a terrible employee, but an excellent sleuth. She was an archaeologist, Clara said, her voice softening, though her eyes stayed hard. Obsessed with artifacts from the war. She spent her life chasing stories of a secret society, one that hid treasures to protect them from being weaponized. That ring, she pointed at it, her fingers steady despite the tension in her frame. It's not just jewelry. It's a cipher. Elias's heart skipped. A cipher? He looked down at the ring, its engravings glinting under the shop's warm lights. The symbols he couldn't decipher, were they a code? A map? His appraiser's mind, trained to catalog and quantify, rebelled against the idea, but his gut told him Clara was right. Amos finally spoke, his voice rough but steady. Your grandmother. What was her name? Clara hesitated, her jaw tightening. Eleanor, she said at last. Eleanor Vance. The name hit Amos like a physical blow. He staggered back, catching himself on the edge of the counter, his cloudy eyes wide with something between hope and fear. Eleanor, he whispered, the word a prayer, a wound. She was, he trailed off, unable to finish, but the rawness in his voice told Elias everything. This wasn't just a ring. It was a lifeline to a woman Amos had loved, and perhaps lost, decades ago. Elias's hands shook as he set the ring down, the weight of the moment pressing against his chest. Amos, he said gently, you said this ring belonged to someone who changed the world. Was that Eleanor? Amos's gaze dropped to the floor, his shoulders sagging. She was everything, he said, so softly Elias strained to hear. We were young, foolish, thought we could outrun the war, the chaos. She gave me this ring, told me to keep it safe, said it was more than it seemed. He laughed, a bitter, broken sound. I didn't believe her then. I should have. Clara's expression softened, but only for a moment. My grandmother spent her life searching for answers, she said. She died believing that Ringer won like it held the key to something bigger, a truth the world forgot. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. If that's the real one, it's dangerous. People have killed for less. Elias felt a chill, the kind that comes not from cold but from standing on the edge of something vast and unknowable. He glanced at the ring, its rusted surface suddenly menacing. Dangerous how? He asked, though part of him didn't want the answer. Clara didn't respond right away. Instead, she reached into her jacket and pulled out a small, worn notebook, its pages yellowed and edges frayed. This was hers, she said, flipping it open to a sketch of a ring identical to the one on the counter. Beside it were notes in a hurried, elegant script, coordinates, cryptic phrases, references to a circle of guardians. Amos's eyes locked on the notebook, his hands trembling as he reached for it. Clara pulled it back, her gaze wary. Not yet, she said. First, tell me where you got it, and why you're here now, after all these years. Elias watched the exchange, his appraiser's instincts screaming that he was out of his depth. He'd spent his life valuing gems, not unraveling mysteries. But the ring, Amos, Clara, they were pulling him into a story he couldn't ignore. I kept it, Amos said, his voice steadying. After Eleanor disappeared, I kept it. Carried it through wars, through cities that burned and rebuilt. I thought she was gone, but last month he paused, swallowing hard. I saw her name. In a newspaper. A mention of an Eleanor Vance, still alive, still searching. I had to know if this ring could lead me to her. Clara's eyes widened, but before she could speak, the store's phone rang, shrill and jarring. Elias flinched, his nerves frayed, and moved to answer it. Hawthorne's, he said, his voice clipped. The voice on the other end was low, unfamiliar, and cold. You have something that doesn't belong to you, it said. Hand over the ring, or you'll regret it. The line went dead before Elias could respond. His hand shook as he set the receiver down, his eyes darting to Amos and Clara. We're in trouble, he said, his voice barely steady. Someone else knows about the ring. Clara's face hardened, and she slipped the notebook back into her jacket. Then we don't have much time, she said. We need to figure out what this ring unlocks before they do. The air in the jewelry store felt thick, as if the walls themselves were pressing in, holding their secrets close. Elias's heart hadn't stopped racing since the phone call, the stranger's voice echoing in his mind like a warning carved in stone. He looked at Amos, whose weathered hands gripped the counter, and Clara, whose sharp eyes darted toward the door as if expecting it to burst open. We need to move, Clara said, her voice low and urgent. If someone's watching, they know we're here. She pulled the notebook from her jacket again, flipping to a page marked with a crude map. My grandmother's notes mention a Placia vault, hidden somewhere in the city. She thought the ring was the key. A vault? Elias asked, his voice cracking. He was an appraiser, not an adventurer. His world was one of magnifying glasses and ledgers, not cryptic maps and shadowy threats. But the ring, sitting innocently on the counter, seemed to pulse with purpose, drawing him deeper into its mystery. Amos's eyes hadn't left the notebook. Eleanor always spoke of a vault, he said, his voice distant, as if he were speaking to the past itself. She said it held truths the world wasn't ready for. I thought it was just her dreamer's talk, but he touched the ring, his fingers trembling. Maybe she was right. Clara snapped the notebook shut. We can't stay here. Whoever called you isn't bluffing. She glanced at Elias, her expression softening just enough to show concern. You don't have to come with us, Mr. Hawthorne. This isn't your fight. Elias wanted to agree, to hand the ring back to Amos and lock the store behind them. But the thought of returning to his quiet, predictable life felt like a betrayal not just of Amos and Clara, but of the spark of curiosity he'd buried long ago. I'm in, he said, surprised by the steadiness in his voice. Let's find this vault. They left the store under the cover of dusk, the city's lights casting long shadows that seemed to shift and follow. Clara led the way, her steps quick and purposeful, while Amos moved slower, his strength waning, but his resolve unshaken. Elias carried the ring in a small velvet pouch, its weight heavier than it should have been. The map in Clara's notebook pointed to an old warehouse district, a maze of crumbling buildings long abandoned by the city's progress. As they navigated the narrow streets, Elias couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every alley seemed to hide a threat, every sound a warning. They reached a derelict warehouse, its windows boarded, its walls streaked with rust and time. Clara traced her fingers along the map, then pointed to a rusted door half hidden by overgrown weeds. This is it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Amos's breath caught, and for a moment, he looked younger, as if the proximity to Eleanor's truth had stripped away decades of wear. She was here, he said, his voice breaking. I can feel it. Clara pushed the door open, revealing a cavernous space lit only by slivers of moonlight slipping through cracked boards. Dust hung in the air, and the faint scent of oil and metal lingered. In the center of the room stood a massive steel door, its surface etched with symbols that matched the ring's engravings. Elias's heart pounded as he handed the ring to Clara. She approached the door, her hands steady despite the weight of the moment. The ring fit into a small, circular indentation in the door's center, clicking into place with a sound that echoed like a gunshot. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low groan, the door began to move. revealing a staircase descending into darkness. Clara's eyes gleamed with a mix of fear and excitement. "This is it," she said. "The vault." But before they could step forward, a figure emerged from the shadows of the warehouse, a man in a tailored coat, his face half hidden by a fedora. He held a gun, its barrel glinting in the moonlight. "You've gone far enough," he said, his voice the same cold tone from the phone call. Elias froze, his heart in his throat. Clara stepped in front of Amos, her stance defiant. "Who are you?" she demanded. The man smiled, a predator's grin. "Someone who's been looking for that ring a lot longer than you have," he said. "It's not just a key. It's power. And you're about to hand it over." Amos's hand tightened on Elias's arm, his voice a low growl. "Eleanor warned me about men like you," he said. "You'll never have it." The man raised his gun, but Clara was faster. She lunged, knocking the weapon from his hand, and chaos erupted. Elias, acting on instinct, grabbed a piece of rusted pipe from the floor, swinging it wildly to keep the man at bay. Amos, frail but fierce, threw himself into the fray, his strength born of desperation. In the scuffle, the ring slipped from Clara's hand, skittering across the floor. The man dove for it, but Amos was there, his hands closing around the ring just as the stranger's fist connected with his jaw. Amos crumpled, the ring clutched tightly in his hand. "Amos!" Elias shouted, dropping the pipe to kneel beside the old man. Clara subdued the stranger, pinning him to the ground, but her eyes were on Amos, wide with fear. Amos's breathing was shallow, but his eyes burned with determination. "Don't let him win," he whispered. "Find her. Find the truth." Clara nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. She took the ring from Amos's trembling hand and stood, facing the open vault door. "We finished this," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "For Eleanor. For Amos." The staircase spiraled into darkness, each step echoing with the weight of secrets long buried. Clara led the way, the ring clutched tightly in her hand, its rusted surface warm against her skin. Elias followed, supporting Amos, whose strength was fading but whose eyes still burned with a fire that refused to die. The air grew colder as they descended, the walls of the vault slick with moisture and time. Elias's heart pounded, his appraiser's logic warring with the surreal reality of the moment. He'd spent his life measuring value in carats and clarity, but this was something else. This was history, love, sacrifice, all bound in a single rusted ring. At the bottom of the stairs, they found a chamber lit by flickering gas lamps, their light casting eerie shadows across stone walls. In the center stood a pedestal, and on it, a small, ornate box engraved with the same symbols as the ring. Clara's breath caught, her fingers trembling as she approached. "This is it," she whispered. "The vault my grandmother wrote about." Amos leaned heavily on Elias, his voice a ragged whisper. "Eleanor's work," he said. "Her life's work." His eyes glistened, not with fear but with a quiet pride that made Elias's chest ache. Clara inserted the ring into a slot on the box, and with a soft click, it opened. Inside was a single piece of parchment, brittle and yellowed, covered in Eleanor's elegant script. Clara's hands shook as she lifted it, her voice breaking as she read aloud. "To those who find this, know that the truth is worth more than power. The circle of guardians protected it, not for glory, but for hope." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Elias felt a chill, realizing that this wasn't just a treasure hunt, it was a mission, a legacy. Eleanor hadn't been chasing wealth, but truth, something the world had forgotten in its rush for power. Before Clara could read further, footsteps echoed from the staircase. The man in the fedora had escaped, and he wasn't alone. Two others flanked him, their faces hard, their hands gripping weapons. "You're too late," the man sneered. "That truth belongs to us now." Clara clutched the parchment to her chest, her eyes blazing. "You'll never understand it," she said. "This isn't for you." Elias's heart raced, but Amos stepped forward, his frail frame trembling but defiant. "You can't take what doesn't belong to you," he said, his voice steady despite the pain etched across his face. "Eleanor's truth isn't yours to steal." The man laughed, raising his gun, but Clara was faster. She grabbed a lamp from the wall and hurled it, shattering it at the men's feet and plunging the chamber into darkness. Chaos erupted, shouts, footsteps, the clatter of metal. Elias pulled Amos to the ground, shielding him as Clara fought, her movements swift and desperate. In the confusion, Elias felt Amos press something into his hand, the ring, still warm from Clara's grip. "Keep it safe," Amos whispered. For her. The fight ended as quickly as it began. Clara subdued one of the men, the others fleeing into the darkness. The chamber was silent again, save for Amos's labored breathing. Clara knelt beside him, her face streaked with dirt and tears. "We did it," she said, her voice breaking. "We found it." Amos smiled, a faint, peaceful smile. "You found her," he said. "That's enough." His eyes fluttered closed, his hand going limp in Elias's. Elias's throat tightened, grief and awe washing over him. Amos had carried the ring and its secrets for 60 years, driven by love and hope. Now, that burden passed to them. Clara unfolded the parchment again, her voice steady as she read the final lines. "The truth is in the stories we tell, the promises we keep. Protect it, not for power, but for those who come after." Elias looked at the ring in his hand, its rusted surface glinting in the dim light. It wasn't just a relic, it was a reminder of what mattered, of the connections that outlast time. He thought of his own life, so small in comparison, and felt a spark of purpose he hadn't known in years. "We need to keep going," Clara said, her voice firm despite the tears in her eyes. "For Amos. For Eleanor. For the truth." Elias nodded, slipping the ring into his pocket. The chamber felt larger now, as if the weight of its secrets had lifted, leaving only possibility. They would carry on, not for power, but for hope, for the stories that deserve to be told.